Hi, Dan here, Scooterotica. Right, just finished up on the dyno and had another interesting session where something cropped up which I see quite often, so I thought this would be a good opportunity to convey it to you guys on the YouTube channel. It's a prime example of why I buy original parts from Eurocarb for the Dilauto carbs that we set up here on the dyno. Chap brought his scooter in, it had been built, the engine had been built by a well-known outfit. I asked him who had pre-jetted it and what spec they'd put in the carb before we did the session. He told me who they were and what they put in. And it's a bit disappointing because they're a fairly well-known and quite big outfit. And so I was a bit disappointed once the dyno session started taking place and I had to take the carb apart to see what was in there. So initially I did a dyno run and it showed up that his engine was actually a really, really great engine, putting out some good power curves and good numbers. It also showed that he was, as expected, running incredibly rich. And that was by design. It had been built with that in mind for the running in period. And once the running in was finished, he just wanted to lean it off. That was the agreement with the dealer. And so that was all as expected. So when I saw the rich fuel, air fuel ratios on the dyno, that was no surprise. I checked to see what his main gen was because I could see it was, you know, his bottom end mid-range was all actually fairly tidy. It was just the main jet that they put of a larger sizing than was required. I checked to see what was in it. It was a 160 main jet. So judging by the air fuel curves, I knew through experience that I would need to come down roughly 5 points and bring it down to a 155 main jet. So I did that, ran it back up on the dyno, and immediately before I even checked the air fuel graphs, I could feel and hear and tell that it was running even richer. So I finished the dyno session, checked the air fuel graph, and sure enough, it was now running richer. But how could that be? I've just dropped it from a 160 main to a 155 main. I've gone down 5 points leaner, yet the air fuel curve is now showing richer. So I pondered this for a moment, and then I just went and grabbed the jet that I'd taken out, that his dealer had fitted, and had a look at it. And I realised it wasn't a genuine Dilauto part. It was one of these spurious aftermarket brands. And this one, you know, as often is the case with these spurious aftermarket brands, it's not even labelled with a brand of any description. It's a blank, where on a Dilauto jet, you've got the Dilauto branding and you've got the size of jet, in this case, you know, 155s, 160s, whatever. On this, there's nothing on the top of the jet, and it says 160 stamped on the side of it. So I went and got the 155 that I put in. I got the 160 that I'd taken out, and I held them up to the light and I looked at them side by side. And even with a cursory glance with the naked eye, I could see that this 160 was in fact a smaller aperture, a leaner aperture, than the 155 I'd put in. So this couldn't possibly be a 160 jet. So I thought, well, if it's not a 160 jet, what the hell is it? So what I elected to do was, well, under close examination, first of all, I could see that it was labelled incorrectly. It wasn't a 60 by any stretch of the imagination. It was something much leaner than that. I could see that where on the official original Dilauto jets, you have a nice taper on either side, on the top and the bottom of the jet as it goes into the 160 aperture. They have a nice taper on them. This had a sudden step. So it was recessed with a sudden step. So there was no nice flowing aperture, and the aperture itself was incorrect. It wasn't a 160. So both it was labelled incorrectly, it was actually a leaner jet than it was purported to be, and it had a bad finish and a bad flow to it with the step as opposed to the tapered aperture. So what I did was I got a couple of K57 Dilauto needles, put them in a piece of blue tack, pressed them down so they were even, and I dropped both jets on, and you could see straight from the off that what I did was I got an actual 160 jet and then this spurious aftermarket 160 jet, dropped them both onto the K57 needles, and my original Dilauto jet dropped significantly further down the needle than this Spurious branded. thus showing that a genuine 160 has a much wider aperture. And again, I've put these on a piece of paper together, I've compared them side by side, and you can see just with a naked eye that an actual 160 is significantly bigger than this spurious aftermarket 160. So then I thought, right, well, if it's not a 160, what is it? So I then proceeded to graduate down through to a 158, 156, 155, 154, 152, and we settled on a 150. So what he had in his engine was labelled up as a 160, is in reality a 150 jet. And I could see this from when they finally got to a point where two jets would sit evenly with each other on these needles. And just to make sure that there was no difference between the two needles, any microscopic, they were both official Delorto K57s, but just to make sure there was no mild differences, I tried the test on either side. So I swapped the jets over from one needle to the other, and it repeated the same results over and over and over. So what's the upshot of this? Well, A, it's crap quality. B, it doesn't flow well. But C, more importantly, it's labelled incorrectly. And if you're taking advice from somebody, oh, what's your setup? Oh, it's the same as yours, identical. What jets are you running? I'm running a 160 main. Suppose you've got an official Delorto jet in, you are running a 160 main. Your mate goes and gets a 160 main from XYZ dealer who sells spurious aftermarket parts. He's actually could be getting a 150. You both tank down the motorway, boom. He holds the piston, blows the engine, seizes it, whatever, because he was running a 150. So when I realised that, you know, this guy's actual jetting, you know, moving on from the dangers of running spurious aftermarket parts, despite his jet being labelled a 160, in his setting, a 150 was actually too rich. So I was able to deduce what he actually had in, rejet it accordingly. We got the readings we needed and wanted, and he's now got the performance and the safety margins that he needs. But that is not without trial and error, and without having the, the luxury of a dyno and the luxury of, a box full of Delorto official needles and jets to compare to. The average guy in the street doesn't have that luxury, doesn't have the dyno jet to hand, doesn't have all those jets for comparison. And so what's the upshot from this is my advice: don't use aftermarket spurious non-branded parts. Use something which is proven, known to be accurate, known to be true, and you will save yourself a whole heap of misery. You won't run into problems with lean jetting. You won't run into problems with not being able to diagnose why your scooter's, not running properly or causing problems. Use the right parts, use the quality parts, and you'll save yourself a whole heap of heartache in the long run. So hope that's been informative for you. Hoping it's give you some food for thought. And if you are changing any jets on yours, be sure to put the proper branded stuff in. That's all for now. See you on the next video.